People often say to me, when's the best time to phone them? What time? And I always just turn around and say, when you're asking that question, that's the best time. All right. Because you're thinking about it and you're ready to do it. You'll feel better after you've had the conversation. And like you say, a lot of people will thank you for phoning them. Make a little note or a tally of how many people thank you for phoning at the end of the conversation, because it will help to reassure you you should continue to do this because people are grateful and actually you are depriving your market by not letting them know that you're there.
Yeah. So don't worry about collecting the no's, collect the thank yous.
Absolutely.
For too long, talented experts with service-based businesses like coaches, consultants, and freelancers have been losing out to the often inferior competition, and for just one reason: they struggle to communicate the true value that they offer. This is made all the more challenging if you have a quieter personality or you're already feeling overwhelmed by everything it takes to market your business. If you can relate, I'm excited that you're here because I believe that value whispering can help. It's the art of getting to know your true value, then weaving this through every interaction you have so you can naturally stand apart from your competitors, feel aligned in everything that you do, and have an impact that matters. It's marketing made simple, straightforward, and impactful. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Melitta Campbell, and I'm excited to be your guide in mastering the art of value whispering. Today on the show, I'm having a conversation that I never thought I would have. As you may be aware, especially if you've read my book, A Shy Girl's Guide to Networking, I'm an introvert and have battled with shyness in the past. So the idea of picking up the phone and talking to strangers was always terrifying. That was until I learned to do it the right way, like a real human. And I suspect that if you are here listening this show, you may have some of the same reservations about having a proactive conversation with your community and prospective next clients. So I have invited the wonderful Anthony Stears onto the show, aka the telephone assassin, to join me. But don't worry, his title is a little bit deceiving. He is not about shooting anyone down, but all about having a polite, well-mannered conversation that will leave people saying thank you. But before we dive in, I want to invite you to join the Dream Clients Club. It's the free community that accompanies this show and supports your business growth. It's where you can continue to discuss the themes from today's show, attend weekly live marketing masterclasses with me, access business growth tools and training, and be part of a wonderfully supportive community of like minds. You can find the Dream Clients Club by visiting melittacampbell.com/club. And just like this podcast, it's completely free and packed full of ideas to support your business growth. So come and join us at melittacampbell.com/club. Okay, so are you ready? Deep breath. Let's discover how we can confidently and strategically have wonderful conversations over the phone. Hi, Anthony. It's great to have you with us on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I have to say I'm quite excited.
And I'm excited now, but I have to admit that it was a previous guest suggested that I have you on the show, and they suggested that about 6 months ago. And when I heard that your title is the telephone assassin and that you help people make telephone calls to strangers, I was like, no way.
No way. But yes, often people hear the words telephone assassin and think this is going to be aggressive sales tactics. And funnily enough, it couldn't be further away from that. I pretty much teach people really good manners and advanced common sense. I tend to play it down when people ask me what I do, but really it's just about teaching people etiquette so that you're polite enough that people want to talk to you and are ready to talk to you. And also understanding the emotional journey that you have to take somebody through before you can realistically expect them to do something as a result of talking to you. So it's a bit about building rapport and trust with people and an easy next step. So yes, it's not as aggressive as it sounds, but obviously we've known each other for a while now. You've been to a few of my sessions and realized that actually it's very well mannered, and although I get classed typically as a sales speaker or expert or trainer. Occasionally, it's more customer service and communication. And I actually put myself in that latter category because although I work with lots of salespeople, I don't really teach them how to sell. I just show them how to help their customers to buy. And when you change the tack, particularly in business nowadays, sales becomes much easier to do, and we all have to sell ourselves. So, yeah, the right conversations can make our lives and our business much better and easier.
Yeah, I think that's something I've really learned from you is that it is all about the conversation, about starting a relationship. And I think when we think about sales in any capacity, but certainly sales on the phone, we think back to the experiences we've had where we've
Yes.
just been bombarded. And what I've loved is how you teach it and how you talk about it is so different.
And that's the one of the main things that I find that puts people off from wanting to make the calls or makes them a little bit scared of the phone is that they've received some terrible phone calls from people who've either argued with you because you weren't interested, or more commonly, I think most of us have received that phone call from somebody who is clearly reading a script, and you get that kind of, and it makes me laugh because they do it to me and they're phoning my company, which is the Telephone Assassin Limited. So you think that would give them a clue, but they phone me up and I'll hear the short intake of breath before they nervously go into this like rattling pitch, and they usually just go, "Hello there, this is my name and this is my company, and I'm going to hit you with a feature followed by a benefit, and I'm going to speak really quickly so you can't interrupt me. And if you haven't hung up by the time I finish speaking, there's a really small chance that you might say yes." And you can always hear them getting out of breath at the end of it, and we sort of chuckle, but I joke, I call this premature elaboration. It's that kind of overexcited or desperate salesperson who just can't hold on to their pitch. They've clearly not got past any gatekeepers, and as soon as you've answered, they kind of give you both barrels down the phone, and that just instantly sets off alarm bells to say that it's a sales call. And we all know how we treat salespeople on the telephone. We try and be evasive or sometimes combative, and yeah, usually just don't enjoy those kinds of calls. So um, yeah, it's a tricky one. My favorite thing that I tend to sort of teach people, one of the earliest techniques that people tend to try, is to stop that premature elaboration happening. I've got a golden rule called PTS, which is about getting permission to speak. And you need to do that at the beginning of a call. So the way I tend to do it is I try and wrap it in really good manners and some good customer service. And I just phone with the assumption that I've called at a bad time because I haven't scheduled a call with them, and I've kind of ambushed them. It's out of the blue. I assume that I'm phoning at a bad time and ask if there's a better time to call back. And what I typically find, and what a lot of my clients find, is you make it so easy for people to get out of that call that they think you can't possibly be in sales, so they don't treat you like a salesperson. And it's just, I think, a really good way of disarming people. um, but you can use that same technique, that PTS, when you have a pre-arranged or a scheduled call, or you meet a friend for coffee at the coffee shop. The PTS then stands for pre-frame the time and the schedule. Basically, at the beginning, say how long you've got and what you're hoping to cover, and double check how long they've got and what they want to cover. Because if you have an hour and they've only got 30 minutes, you want to know at the beginning of that conversation so that you can cover everything that you need to, rather than thinking that you're building rapport and making small talk and it gets to 28 minutes and all of a sudden they're looking at their watch and have to go, and you don't get to talk about the things you wanted to talk about. So little techniques like that I always think help people. But when I do my permission to speak, I would usually say something along the lines of, "Oh, good morning, Melitta. My name is Anthony Stears. I was just hoping to chat to you for a couple of minutes, but I'm guessing I probably caught you at a bad time. Is there a better time to call you back?" And if you were that busy, you probably wouldn't have answered the phone. And if you did answer the phone, the likelihood is you'll be curious as to what the call is about, and you'll kind of lean in and ask me and say, "Well, I've got 2 minutes now. What's the call about?" Well, most people tend to go, "Well, there's never a good time to catch me. They only want 2 minutes. Go on then," and you get a chance. But having said that, I I train people and their communication styles are very different to mine. And I often tell a story about a guy called Mitchell who worked for a big financial services business up in London. It was very much boiler room kind of environment. There was about 80 of them in pods, all smashing the phones all day long. And he tried my permission to speak word for word with a client. But let me give you a bit more sort of backstory. He's sort of late 20s. He's from East London, so he thinks I'm posh. I think he sounds like he works on a market. So he's a bit like, all right, mate, all right, Mr. Assassin, how's it going? And he just, yeah, his style of speaking was very different to mine. Um, and he tried my permission to speak with a client word for word, and the client said, well, what's happened to you? And he said, well, I'm doing some training. And his client said, I don't think it's working. And he went, don't worry, I'll call you back. And he came back and said, your permission to speak doesn't work. And I remember sort of saying to him, well, it does work. And he went, no, I did it exactly how you said, word for word. And this is what the client said. And I sort of highlighted to him, yeah, but that's not normally how you would speak and your style. You need to get your words for what it is we're doing here. And he went off and had a little break. And when he came back in, he had a big smile on his face and he was excited. He wanted to do the call on loudspeaker in front of everybody because he had this confidence that he had nailed this permission to speak. And then he panicked me a little bit. He went, don't worry, Mr. Assassin, I can do it in 6 words. And I was like, oh God, this is going to be terrible. But he phoned his client, and when his client answered, he just went, hello, fella, good time, bad time. And it was just so lovely because his client went, not a great time. What do you want? And he went, I'm after a testimonial. And he went, send me an email and I'll send it back to you later. So once he'd found his style of doing the permission to speak, all of a sudden it just sounded much more natural. And that's the kind of point I like to make is I try and give people the essence of how to be polite and well mannered on the phone, but you still have to use words that you're comfortable with that suit your style. Otherwise, people will realize it's not your style or you'll seem unauthentic with people. But yeah, just that simple phrase, good time, bad time, is his way of doing his permission to speak. So yeah, if you are listening to this, you may have slight variations of how you would do this. But if you get permission to speak at the beginning of a call or a conversation, you tend to relax. You don't tend to rush the conversation. You've been given permission to speak. They are ready to engage. And if they're not, they'll usually say, actually, no, it's not a good time. Could you call me back at 4 o'clock? Or would you mind giving me a call on Friday? And I basically just repeat that same process over and over again. I'd call you on Friday and say, hey, Melitta, you said to give you a call on Friday, but I know you're a busy lady. We're just after a few minutes, but if now isn't a good time, happy to give you a call back. And I'd rather you put me off 3 or 4 times and make me wait a month if it means that on that fourth or fifth call, you're ready to engage and we can have a proper conversation.
I love that you've given people, well, we started with politeness and good manners because I believe everyone listening to this podcast, that's really important to them. And we don't like to bother people. So using those words gets around that perfectly because you know you're not bothering people, because if you are, you just schedule another time.
By giving them an easy out, you're not backing them into a corner or forcing them. If you force a conversation somebody isn't ready to have, you're going to get very short, sharp answers. It'll be quite hard to lead or guide them towards a viewpoint. When it comes to sales, I often say sales will always be a numbers game, okay? But it isn't really, I don't think, about overcoming objections or convincing people to buy. It's more about capitalizing on the conversations people are ready to have. If they're ready to have a conversation, you will engage with them. If they're not, if you are responsible for sales for your business and you find within 30 to 90 seconds, the first thing people say is, could you just email me? You probably aren't doing your permission to speak properly, would be my guess. But yeah, like you say, just good manners and advanced common sense, as I said at the beginning.
Yeah. But the trouble is, common sense isn't always common practice, is it? So, as you were
No.
given that example of just checking in, well, how much time do you have? I have this amount of time. You think, well, that makes perfect sense. But whoever does that? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
but that's one of the really where that technique works really well is if you're meeting people on Zoom, for example.
Mhm.
Because quite often we just assume that they will have blocked out an hour as well. And again, if they've only got 30 minutes, if you know that at the beginning, you can dive into the elements of the conversation you need to cover much earlier. But if I know you've got an hour, then we can have a bit of small talk and I can ask you about your family, or I might have noticed something on social media, or you might have mentioned something in an earlier conversation that I can sort of reference back to. Because fundamentally, you need people to like you, and that's kind of what one of the first of the three phases of the conversation is all around rapport. If people like you, they'll listen. If they don't, they won't, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I guess it's setting the foundations for that ongoing relationship. If they believe that you're someone who's polite and respectful and they like, then that's a pretty good foundation to go forward with. So, but if they think you're someone that's
Absolutely.
going to really just waste their time, then they're not going to want to know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so I think the analogy I often give is if you're responsible for prospecting and reaching out, like you should be basically cultivating relationships is really what you're doing rather than looking for your next deal. Um, but when you're doing it, I often use the analogy of it should feel like you're dropping off a pizza menu. Because most of us get takeaway menus put through our letterbox on a relatively regular basis. I know they're trying to get us to use the apps and stuff more now anyway, but we get the menus put through our door. And when I ask audiences, everybody nods along and says, yeah, yeah, I get those menus. And then I often say, how many of them have ever knocked on your door when they're dropping off the menu and tried to take an order? I mean, could you imagine that if you had a knock at the door, you opened it up, and there was me stood there in a Domino's outfit going, okay, can I take your order? All right. Now, to most people, that's very presumptuous, and you'd probably slam the door in their face, right? Now, don't get me wrong, do that on a Friday and Saturday night and only knock on the doors of houses blaring music, having a party. You might sell some pizzas. But 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, the likelihood is most people are going to slam the door in your face. But it's a feeling of awareness, and I think that's really what business development is become more about now, is making sure people know who you are and why they might want to get in touch when the time is right, rather than just trying to sell down the phone to them, because nobody likes to be sold to. But funnily enough, statistics show we all love to buy.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. We want to buy, we want solutions to our problems, but I say we don't want someone just to impose that solution and tell us this is the
mhm.
solution you need. And I think, I don't know, I'll come on to if you've noticed a difference between men and women, but in my experience, women like to be part of that sales conversation. They want to be part of that decision. That's an important part of the shopping process for us. We like that experience. So just
Yeah,
having someone assume this is going to be
yep.
right for you already, you've taken away some of that joy. So they want to be part of that.
Absolutely. And I suppose there's a little bit of difference. I often get asked, like, do I just do B2B or is it B2C as well? Because obviously the dynamics changes. I usually say that I actually do H to H, so it's basically just human to human. It doesn't really matter if you're selling to somebody, a person or a company, they're still going to go through that same kind of emotional journey before they decide to buy. It's a tricky one. Every buyer is different, and the stats say that now people have made 80% of their buying decisions before they've even reached out to a big company to find out more about that product. So rather than the old-fashioned way of selling, so back in the 90s and what have you, the salesperson would withhold information and drip feed it out to the prospect in front of them. They would then release the information to them. Whereas now in this digital world, people have done their research, and your job is usually to help them overcome a bit of overwhelm. Usually they've gathered so much information, some of it's relevant, some of it's not. And actually, and that's why I often say it becomes more about helping people to buy rather than trying to sell to them. Because usually people, particularly in a buying situation, people have two main questions, which are how much is it and how quickly can I have it? Because time and money are the things we tend to value most. And you do need to be able to answer those questions. But in order to become that kind of trusted advisor and help them to buy, what you really want to do is answer those questions and then tell them about the other two or three really important questions they should be asking if they are going to buy this product or service, regardless of from you or somebody else. Because as you start to teach them the right questions to ask and why, and explain why that's important to them, you then start to earn the right to make a recommendation. Okay, and that's what great salespeople do, is they position themselves as the person who can help demystify all of this information that they've been sent, has enough technical knowledge to explain and understand and match the problem to the solution. Okay, or help you match the right product for you and for your budget. And really, like I say, salespeople now are more customer service representatives who are there to help customers to buy rather than talking them into buying. It doesn't tend to happen anymore, or there are only certain environments where that works still.
Yeah, exactly. And Michelle Rockwell came on the podcast a while ago, and she talked about how the role of the sales conversation now is to help the customer find their truth, which I guess is what you were saying there. Like, what
Yeah,
is it that they really need, and what are they missing? And
yeah,
so whether they buy from you or not, they
yeah.
feel confident making that right decision.
Yeah. And I think that want and need is quite a good distinction when having that conversation. Is they'll tell you what they want. You need to clarify what it is they need, and then confirm whether or not what they've asked for will match. When you're in a service industry, I've heard the phrase of sell them what they've asked for, but give them what they need. That usually can work in a service type environment, but with products, obviously, it's not as black and white as that, and it's a little bit trickier. But yeah, it's interesting because the dynamics of the sales process is changing. Um, COVID itself changed a lot of people's views on interacting with other human beings, and the thought of picking up the phone and like that still scares a lot of people. But one thing that they did notice during COVID is that the postmen and women out there delivering all the post and the couriers were taking a lot longer on their shifts. And the reason for that was that people were craving human interaction. And when the postie turned up, you'd ask him how his day's been, or you'd ask him a few questions because it was the first human that you'd seen in 24 hours. So we all crave that connection, I think, with other humans. And there's an energy transfer that can happen through a conversation as well. My mission is to get everybody talking again and stop posting and hiding behind social media and websites and trying to tell everybody you're living the Instagram life. Just pick up the phone and have some conversations with people. It will enrich your day. And what I often say is that there's actually opportunity in nearly every conversation that we have. It's usually not for us, which is why we don't notice it. But the more conversations you have, the more opportunities seem to present themselves. And if you surround yourself with other great business minds as well, there's usually opportunities to recommend and refer people and introduce somebody who could be helpful and help somebody move forwards from a particular situation. So,
Yeah. And one thing, recently I haven't made telephone calls, but I have in the past. And one thing that really stood out for me and really helped me actually build my confidence around this was that every time I had a conversation, even if it was a bad time, even if they didn't want to buy and they just took the pizza menu for the moment,
yep.
they always said thank you.
Hmm.
And that really helped me realize, as you
Yep.
say, that human to human interaction, that conversation itself is really
Yep.
valuable and so
Usually,
rare.
yeah, and even with cold outreach, if you do it properly, over three-quarters of people that you phone will thank you for phoning. Okay. One of the things I often talk about perfecting your pitch is sharing success stories people can relate to. So using your case studies and testimonials from clients, and they should kind of be like one page references, I suppose, but you should have this credibility library of all of the feedback from all of your clients. And on days where you're feeling a little bit low, or you get out the wrong side of bed, or you need to convince yourself to pick up the phone and reach out to a few people, I often say start your day by reading your credibility library. Remind yourself how grateful your clients are for what it is you do, because prospects will be grateful too. And by not letting people know that you're there, you're depriving your market of your services. Okay. So if you think about it like that, how if you empower a particular profile or certain type of person or people, you should be reaching out and saying, hey, you're probably not looking for this right now, but if you are in the future, this is what I do and this is what people say about me, and just share some of the feedback that you've had from your clients. Then it's a proactive way of creating awareness. and you alleviate the most uncomfortable thing that people say happens in the pitch, which is the bit where you have to tell them how good you are. Okay, because it feels slightly braggy and arrogant. And actually, when you turn around and say, well, look, here's what somebody else similar to you has said about me, have a look what they say. And if you think it's worth having a coffee, I'd love to have a chat. And maybe I could even offer you a little test drive and I could show you how this would work for you. Okay. And it's like I say, it's much more helping people to buy and awareness than cold calling and each no being one step closer to your next yes, which I think is a common phrase that if you've done sales training, people will often say, oh, yes, don't worry. Each no is one step closer to your next yes. And it's supposed to make you feel better and not want to go and cry in the corner after three people have hung up on you on the trot. Personally, I actually believe that we're using the wrong approach. That's my kind of take on it.
Yeah, exactly. And one question I was going to ask you was, Eleanor Roosevelt says do something every day that you don't want to do, or something every day that scares you. And I
Yeah.
was listening recently to Martha Beck, and she said in that situation, she just runs at it because if she thinks about it, she won't do it. And I was going
Yep.
to ask, like, what advice would you give people that are thinking, well, yeah, this makes sense. It sounds like actually it's a nice way to serve people, a nice way to have a
Yep.
conversation in a very human
Yep.
way. But actually picking up that phone in the first place can be a
Yeah.
bit scary.
Can be
Is there any,
scary.
so we can read our case studies. Is there
Um,
anything else you would advise?
well, firstly, what you said about Roosevelt there, I can't remember who wrote the book, and I might be getting this mixed up, but there was a book about having to eat a frog. And they say
Yeah.
if you have to eat, yeah, if you have to eat a frog, eat the frog. Don't look at it and think about eating the frog. You just do it. Okay. It's that ripping the band-aid off and just doing it. Um, People often say to me, when is the best? I know I need to phone this person. I think I know what I'm going to say. When's the best time to phone them? What time? Okay. And I always just turn around and say, when you're asking that question, that's the best time. All right. Because you're thinking about it and you're ready to do it. As long as you approach it with I'm guessing I've called you at a bad time. I wondered if when's a better time to call you back. Maybe we could schedule a time. Okay. And what you'll typically find is if it's a bad time for them, they'll push back when that call should be, and you then have more time to plan for it. However, because you've made the choice to pick up the phone and just dial now, I'll probably make a few notes of, okay, well, no, I know I need to speak to Melitta. I sent her a proposal a few weeks back and she hasn't come back to me, and I don't want to look desperate, but I want to make sure she's got it. And she's probably got some questions or such and such. I then should just go, okay, hey, Melitta, I just wanted to follow up and make sure my email got through your spam filter. Okay. And I'd do that to just check you've actually got it and say, look, I'm guessing you may have some questions or concerns about it. Just wondered, is there a point where we should get 15 minutes in the diary and you can pick my brains, or if there's anybody else involved in the decision, you could invite them onto the conversation as well. Um, yeah, sometimes you've just got to do it. I think Nike had it right. Just do it. There you go. Particularly with a lot of these conversations, you'll feel better after you've had the conversation. And like you say, a lot of people will thank you for phoning them. So, for anybody listening in, if you do start to make a couple of phone calls, or if you're already making phone calls, particularly outreach, make a little note or a tally of how many people thank you for phoning at the end of the conversation, because it will help to reassure you you should continue to do this because people are grateful. And actually, like I say, you are depriving your market by not letting them know that you're there.
Yeah. So don't worry about collecting the no's, collect the thank yous.
Absolutely, absolutely. Collect the thank yous. And when you hear the words thank you, there we go. This leads me into another one of my little golden rules. When you hear the words thank you from a client, that is your moment to gracefully accept their thanks and then ask for something in return. Okay, so you talked about collecting thank yous. When people say thank you, I'd be saying, you're very welcome, Alita. It's all part of the service. I'm glad you've enjoyed it. However, seeing as you seem so happy, I don't suppose you'd mind sharing a couple of lines of what I've been like to work with, and I might ask you for some feedback. Or I might say, oh, you're very welcome, Melita. I'm really glad that you've enjoyed this. If there are other opportunities to come back and work with you more, or if you've got a team I could work with, so basically ask for more opportunity. Or from the third thank you onwards, you just ask for referrals or introductions. So it would be, yeah, you're very welcome, Melita. It's all part of the service. But seeing as you seem so happy, I don't suppose you could think of just one person that I should reach out to who might benefit from my services. or might benefit from having a little test drive, maybe.
Yeah. And I noticed that you said it in the negative. Like, don't you think, or I've forgotten how you said it already. You said
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I don't suppose you'd mind sharing a
Yes.
few lines. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Is that a tactic in itself? Never asking, would you mind? But instead of, I don't suppose, is that
Yeah, I think whatever wording kind of suits you and feels most natural. I tend to try and be unassuming, okay? Simply because salespeople tend to assume and try and back you into a corner, and it just feels like they're in control of the conversation. Whereas if you let people decide how they want to proceed in a conversation, you typically find that it will go in its natural course. I don't necessarily deliberately use that wording. There are slight variations when I'm asking for feedback. It depends on what mood I'm in. It depends on the person that I'm talking to as well. It's just getting into the habit of doing this stuff consistently is the real key. So that thank you equals ask, for example, I would often encourage people to have a post-it note that they stick on the top of their screen that just says thank you equals ask. And it's just there simply as a reminder and a prompt that when you hear the words thank you, gracefully accept it and then ask for something in return. It's that perfect moment to do it. Thank you is a verbal cue of gratitude. They're now indebted to you, right? And yes, they probably paid for the service or the product already, but when they are happy, that's the moment to ask for something and your best chance of getting it.
yeah. And it's surprising how quickly that becomes a habit because I know when I first learning sales properly, that was one of the pieces of advice. If anyone says thank you, ask for whatever you want then. And
Mm,
so it has become a habit and it felt very weird at
yeah,
first. But now
yeah,
it feels natural on my sales conversations. If for whatever reason the client isn't ready to become a client, then they so often they say, oh, thank you, I really enjoyed this time. It's been very valuable. I'm like, you're welcome. Would you mind leaving a Google review? It really helps other
yeah,
people feel confident reaching out. And that, yeah, 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 of course. So a lot
mm,
of my Google reviews are
yeah,
from people I've had sales conversation with. But I think that's a really nice indication that you're getting it right as well. When people say thank you, that you're not being pushy and we can lean
yeah,
into that, that
yeah.
the sales conversation itself can be really, really valuable for people. And so try and give as much of that value as you can as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned, we all like to buy, and when people are often asked what are their methods of buying, asking friends and colleagues and getting referrals and recommendations is one of the top things people like that will help guide them with their purchase. So even if it's not a full-on client, but somebody that you've helped, again, getting them to share their experience of, I usually say, would you mind just writing a couple of lines, one of what I've been like to work with, and the second point is what's happened as a result of working with me. Because that then kind of tells a little bit of a story. And if you can get, yeah, I spent half an hour with Melitta on the phone, and actually, I've finally got my head around the fact of what our worth truly is, and ways that I can convey that now in conversations and through my marketing with people. So this has given us a massive boost in confidence and ideas for campaigns for the next 6 months, or something along those lines, right? All of a sudden, that hour feels like it was packed with value, but people often just forget to ask. And there's a lady who talks about imposter syndrome, and she often talks about, just from a mental health perspective, check your receipts. Basically, be grateful and check all of your achievements and things that you've done. And that's a bit like my credibility library. Sometimes you just need to look back and remind yourself of what a great job you've done, and how grateful clients are, to help spur you on to get through that quieter spell and make some noise so that other people can find you and the right people can find you, and then hopefully you get to help and serve your market rather than spamming your market and trying to sell to anybody who you can talk to.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think for those who are early in their journey of their business, maybe they haven't got those case studies and receipts yet, but
Absolutely.
they do. You can assume that the thanks and the quality of the work you've done your entire
Yep.
career up to this point, you
Hmm.
can continue that. You'll continue to give that value.
Absolutely. There's a couple of things that people often say, well, I'm brand new, so I haven't got these sort of case studies and this credibility library. Well, the likelihood is you probably are still doing what your last job was, but for yourself or something. So there is no harm in going back to people for sort of references of work you've done for them. That if it's still to do with marketing, for example, when you were the marketing manager for an agency, okay, your clients talking about you there is still as relevant and credible as a client who comes and works for yourcompany.com type of thing, right? So you can actually use past references to kind of more give you character reference type style of thing. But in the early days, what you can actually do is you might offer people a discount or maybe even a freebie based on the fact that, well, you are one of my first clients, so I'm prepared to do this for you. So I'll do it for you at cost price to me on the condition that you share the results and the outcomes and you answer 3 questionnaires at various points throughout this process. Okay. And give me permission if those results are good enough to use that as part of my marketing. Okay. So quite often you could say to somebody, if you're happy for me to document what happens, I'm happy for you to be the guinea pig and we'll test this stuff out. And because they know that you want the story out of the end of it, they know that you need them to get results. So it kind of, the dynamics changes. It's a beautiful tactic and approach because people then think, well, go on then, I've got nothing to lose here, right? Because if my feedback isn't good enough, you can't use it for your marketing. And if you don't get me results, I'm going to write that. So actually, it's a lovely way of turning the pressure back on you and giving people a chance to experience what you're like to work with and eliminating some of that risk. Or you could do some results based payment in those earlier stages that they don't pay until you've hit a particular milestone. And again, it puts pressure on you. If you are going to do that, you probably want to put some kinds of caveats of expectations of activity from their end.
Yeah.
Basically, I can help you achieve this as long as you spend 15 minutes every day doing this particular task. If you don't spend 15 minutes doing that task, I haven't failed, you have, or that's why the campaign has failed, basically. So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And we had Janine Liston, the pricing lady, on the show a few weeks ago talking about, well, what makes a fair price? And
Uh-huh.
in that situation, it's like the price may be discounted, but the value to you goes up because you're getting those testimonials, which will bring you more clients and so on. So getting
Mhm.
that balance, you can play around with that.
Absolutely. And when talking about pricing, using the phrase fair pricing with clients who are trying to, it can help in a negotiation kind of environment, particularly in the earlier stages. So just sort of adding on to what we were saying there, as long as you don't begrudge the fee that you're getting for that particular client, then there shouldn't really be too many issues. And sometimes the fee isn't actually a monetary thing. It's, well, I'm going to get pictures of me on stage and I'm going to get a video testimonial from that client and I'm allowed to use their logo and I'm going to post this and that's going to give me extra reach. So if that is what you're thinking or you're going to go down that route, don't show this to anybody, but I often recommend that you build what's referred to as a value swap document. Come up with a list of things that if they've got no money that they could do for you that's worth something. Okay. And sometimes that's just introductions to full paying clients. Sometimes it's testimonials. There's a variety of different things that people could do for you. And it will help you feel like you have negotiated and done a value swap rather than, excuse the phrase, I call it PDP, pants down pricing, where you just feel like you've just dropped the price to get the deal. And actually, the price shouldn't really be the big factor. It's more credibility in those early stages.
Mm.
Um, and if price is a factor, and if you're in a kind of commodity market, I often say that price will win you a deal, service will win you a customer. And if you win a deal on price, you'll probably lose it next time on price. Or if you keep it, it's a race to the bottom and you'll make no money. Whereas if you serve clients well, they will come back. And although, particularly in the current economic climate, people are being more cautious with their spending, as you mentioned, and the pricing lady would have mentioned, it's more about value than cost. And value is like beauty, it's in the eye of the beholder, and it's down to you to help shine the light on that for prospects so that they can see the value and that the value outweighs the cost.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, One thing I wanted to ask was, we've talked about using the telephone for that proactive helping, that first call to start a relationship. What happens next? So, what happens in that process? Do you continue to use the phone? Because we know that you mentioned it's a numbers game, and only about 3 to 5% of people are ready to buy at any one time, particularly if you're catching them off
Yep.
guard and it's not something that's on their mind.
Mhm.
So, what happens next to keep that relationship going? Do you have any thoughts on a simple
So
process?
again, it would depend on the type of business that you are, but on a very first call, all I want to do is get them to start to like me and start to establish my credibility. So a first call is usually, hey, Melitta, this is what it is I do, but I'm guessing you're probably not looking right now. Okay, let's get that out the way. Yeah. Then when you confirm you're not looking right now, what you're basically doing is confirming that I might look at this in the future. Right. And when you confirm that you might look at this in the future, I'll say, well, look, all I wanted to do was give you a reason to remember me. Can I share what your competitors say about me? Have a look at what they say. And if you think it's worth having a chat, I'd love to give you a test drive. Right. So that's how my first call would go. My follow up call would pretty much go, hey, Melita, I just wanted to check my email got through your spam filter. Okay. I wouldn't ask you if you've read it, because if that's the question that I ask you and you haven't had chance to read it yet, you are likely to think I'm being impatient or salesy and potentially try and push me back or keep me at arm's length, where you may say something like, well, I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, Anthony, I'm rather busy at the moment, but if I'm interested, I'll come back to you. Right. And the ball's in their court and it's hard then. Whereas if I was to say, did it get through your spam filter? Most people will usually confirm it got through their spam filter and then admit they haven't had a chance to look at it yet, which means I can then say, don't worry, that was part of the reason why I wanted to phone, was to one, double check it came through, and two, just remind you why I've included those two particular case studies and why I think they're relevant to you. Okay. And then that pretty much then turns into, so now you've seen my references. What I'd really like to do is offer you a test drive. I don't know what kind of test drive you would find most useful. And then I would try and get into a conversation of, well, do you need an online demo? Would you like a copy of my book? Do we need to do a discovery meeting and all get together? Basically, what's the next step? And for some companies, they sell digital products or online platforms and portals, and they'll end up saying, well, in which case, now you've seen our references and you know that we're quite good, maybe you want to have a look at our online portal so you can see what it looks like. And I could even, if you like the look of it, set you up a 30-day trial where you could test this out, for example. So that's just showing you how the journey might move forwards depending on what the test drive is.
Mhm.
But usually, when you've had your discovery meeting or you've sent your pitch, for example, I believe the latest stats say that majority of people require 5 follow-ups after their first meeting with you. Now, I initially thought that that's because it takes 5 attempts to catch somebody at a good time when they're able to speak to you, and that is part of it. But apparently, the reason it takes 5 attempts to catch them is that they want to know you've worked for it and you want their business. They want to know that you've bothered to follow up, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is why at the end, I've talked about the PTS at the beginning, that permission to speak. At the end of a conversation, you should always do a TFR, which stands for take final responsibility of when you're next going to speak to them. So if I was to send you a proposal or you asked me to send you some information, I would say, yes, no worries at all, Melita. I'll email that to you this afternoon. But can I just ask, realistically, when do you think you're going to get a chance to look at it by? So what I'm doing now is I'm allowing you to put a time frame on it. Okay, so the most common answer is usually by the end of the week, for example. In that situation, if you would say, oh, yeah, I'm sure I'll get a chance to look by the end of the week, I'll say, fantastic. Well, let me know if there's any immediate questions or concerns. But let's book in a 15-minute call for Friday afternoon. So if you haven't had a chance to go through it, we can quickly go through it together. If you have gone through it, I can answer any questions or concerns that you may have. And then the line I always use is to justify this next call is I would say, I just want to make sure by the end of our next conversation, you have all the information you need to decide whether or not you think we're a good fit. So that, I suppose, I think answers the question of how I would go through that process. But there are certain people that I'll speak to And I will email them and I'll say, well, look, I'll give you a call next week. And they'll say, well, I'm quite busy next week. Could you just flick me a quick WhatsApp? Would you mind sending me a little LinkedIn message, and I'll do it that. If people indicate a particular method of which they prefer you to communicate, then obviously you then tend to divert. My rule is email is very useful, okay? But other than for marketing and spamming the world, as far as I'm concerned, email should be used to create a paper trail of the conversations you've already had. You shouldn't be trying to have a conversation through email, because tone, empathy, it doesn't jump off the page. It doesn't come across in the same way. So, yeah, like I say, try and use email to create the paper trail of what's been said and transfer information, rather than trying to have too many conversations that are typed and delayed and days in between responses. I appreciate that in certain situations where people are on different time zones to you. If I've got clients in Australia at the moment, it's kind of good because I can catch them at the beginning or the end of the day. But when our clocks change and their clocks change again, it's much harder to get a reasonable houred conversation with somebody on the other side of the world. In which case, email, WhatsApp, text, that kind of thing might be a quicker way of conversing and moving the conversation forwards. But personally, I don't believe that you can replace the engagement and energy transfer that happens in a conversation through any other means of messaging.
Yeah, it's interesting to say that about follow-up, because what I had noticed is sometimes people instantly like, yeah, I'm really interested. And other times I've messaged them or contacted them like 5, 6, 7 times, and they
Yep.
haven't replied at all, but I've continued. And then they've come back and said, I really appreciate that you've time to stay in contact. I'm sorry I'm being so rubbish. Let's
Yep.
book a call. And then they usually 9 times out of 10, they become a client.
They
Yeah.
actually appreciate your persistence, right?
Yeah.
And I don't send too many email campaigns out, if I'm honest with you. But the one that I tend to do most years around Christmas is I send out an email to the people who are in my pipeline who haven't responded for quite some time. Okay. And the title of the email is "Please tell me to sod off, dot, 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 or not." Okay. And it literally just says, "Hey there, I've tried to reach you quite a few times now. I'm starting to feeling like I'm hassling you. If you want me to take you off of the database, please let me know. I really won't be offended." And that's it. And I think I only sent 5 or 6 last year, and all but one responded within 2 days to apologize that they hadn't been coming back to me and informing me that they wanted to stay in contact. I think 3 of them were then we're now ready to have that conversation. 2 of them went, we're just waiting for this to happen and this to happen, then we're ready. And like you say, actually, that persistence, I usually refer to the 3 Ps when it comes to prospecting and sales. You need to be polite, persistent, and patient. Okay, if you can follow those 3 rules, then actually people will either tell you to go away, and that's fine. Getting no's is actually a good thing because it gets them off your list. Getting 2 no's on the trot is worrying. So if you go back to what we were saying earlier on, but yeah, that's kind of my take on it, I suppose.
Brilliant. Andy, thank you so much. We could talk all
Oh
day
yeah.
about this, but I'm going to call it a day there, because I think everyone's just probably getting really excited now, hopefully getting really excited about picking up the
It's
phone.
yeah.
If they do want to hear more from you, learn more about this process, where's the best place for them to find you?
I suppose LinkedIn is probably where most people tend to find me first. If you Google the telephone assassin, you will find all kinds of stuff and all content for me. My phone number is very easy to find. I love hearing from people. You can obviously send me messages and emails in LinkedIn and inquiries and stuff through my website. But pick up the phone. I don't have a gatekeeper, so if I'm not on stage or on the phone or on Zoom, I will answer. If you leave me a voicemail, I will call you back. If they mention you, Melitta, I will call you back even quicker. There you go. But yeah, reach out and connect with me. And if you try out any of the things that we've been talking about today, I would love to know what happened, because that really determines my reputation. It's not how good you feel after you've heard me speak, it's what happens afterwards when you put it into practice and hopefully realize that these conversations aren't as scary as we thought, and picking up the phone. If you're ready to do a permission to speak, you probably won't have any bad conversations or forced conversations that will go the wrong way. So yeah, please do get in touch if you're listening in, and yeah, share what happened next.
And I can recommend your book as well, The Telephone Assassin. It covers everything that we've just talked about and more. And it's great. It's a small book. It's easy to read. I sat down and read it on my way home from London once on the plane.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
really easy to digest and easy to dip in and out of once you want a little refresher before you make
Yes,
that
yeah,
phone call.
Somebody the other day said, "Oh, it's a great little reference book." Sometimes I have to go back. But one of the things that you said earlier on, which really kind of made me smile, which was that that thank you equals ask thing. You now just do it. You talked about it just becoming a good habit, and that's what I try and get people to do. Is I explain best practice, but do it really well and realize how much it helps you, and it will just become a good habit, and you'll just do it anyway. It's no longer best practice, it's just good habit. It's the thing that I know works, and it will come naturally.
Yeah. Anthony, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. I have to say, I've loved chatting with you, and at some point I will have to do it again sometime. But for anybody listening, I hope you found this useful.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you have found this episode valuable and are all set to proactively add value through a human conversation with your next dream client. Do come and share your gems and insights in the Dream Clients Club. If you have enjoyed this episode, please do take a minute to help another business owner to grow by sharing this episode with your network and business besties and leaving a review for the show on Apple Podcasts. And again, I would love for you to come and join us in the Dream Clients Club and to welcome you to our next value session. These are weekly live masterclasses with me, where you can come, learn, be part of the community, and get your questions answered. You'll find this at melittacampbell.com/club. There are a lot more tools, tips, and insights coming up for you in the next episode, so don't miss next week's show, or better still, subscribe now so you never miss your weekly dose of inspiration. I'm Melitta Campbell, your business coach and value whisperer, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.